Chimaera was never just the name of a single creature that was suffocated with a lead-tipped spear by Bellerophon in Greek mythology. With one very quick search for Chimaera on Google or Google Scholar leads one to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of results. Maybe one out of a few hundred will have anything to do with mythology at all, as most follow the newer meanings and the updated uses of the word. An organism containing a mixture of genetically different tissues formed by the processes such as fusion of early embryos, grafting, or mutation. But even before the existence of the name, there were mythological creatures in hundreds of cultures that would fall under this descriptive banner. There's also the archaic genus of the cartilaginous fish Chimaera and grotesque architecture, the architectural style that features gargoyles, aka grotesques. When looking at the definition through the lens of paleontology, a chimera is defined as a fossil reconstructed by combining features from more than one single species or genus of animal. One famous example of this is Protoavis. Another definition, which is apt, though possibly not the most relevant, is a thing that is hoped or wished for, but in fact is illusionary or impossible to achieve. This one seems to be an attempt of building a definition from the origin story. In this way, future generations can learn that while Bellerophon thought that killing the chimera would help him reach his goal of heroics and maybe not be killed by his extended family, it was all a trick. He was only ever set off to die, and his heroics were illusions covered by his hubris. As the saying goes, pride comes before the fall. Chimera are a human way of explaining anything that doesn't fit into one definition or strata, making something a dangerous other. Having to explain mixtures of genetics or fossils, and like bestiaries, likely partially the predecessors of scientific development, humans could be trusted to invent explanations for anything out of the ordinary, to keep people in line or to create inexplicable heroes, make a man-eater out in the surrounding mountain forest. More recently, and included in tales from older mythos, it seems that the varying definition is almost fighting against the oldest beliefs that anything would be impossible, or more importantly, inherently a monster. My name is Renee Whitehouse. You are listening to Detours in Archaeology. This is episode 12. Let's take a detour into all the Chimaera. The most common visual in popular culture and in many stories in the Greek or Roman mythos, or in a Dungeons and Dragons bestiary, is not the only version of Chimaera. She, or they, are powerful beings that are a heterogeneous mixture of scientific discovery, myth, and plain old human curiosity and discovery, which is more of a mixture than the previous two true chimera. In the ancient Greek mythos, Bellerophon, a hubristic hero, was sent on what was basically a suicide mission by King Iobates of Lycia to go kill the chimera. One wonders how or why they determined in the mythos whether it was female, but that's defined in the etymology of she-goat and plays into the mythology. She is sometimes credited with giving birth to the Greek Sphinx, a creature that is explored later. But being the child of Typhon and Echidna and a sibling of the monsters like Cerberus and the Linnaean Hydra, the chimera was described differently in the Iliad, orated by Homer as a thing of immortal make, not human, lion-fronted and snake behind, a goat in the middle, and snorting out the breath of a terrible flame of bright fire. Versus Hesiod's Theogony, in which she is described as a creature fearful, great, swift-footed, and strong, who has 3 heads, one of a grim-eyed lion, in her hinder part a dragon, and in her middle a goat, breathing forth a fearful blast of blazing fire. These descriptions, with both their contradictions and their similarities, explain why artistic depictions can vary so widely, especially due to the sharing and competition that would arise, especially if both Homer and Hesiod were contemporaries of each other, living in Greece around 750 BCE, as is thought by scholars. These were not the only authors who wrote on the Chimaera. She also makes appearances in Book 1 of the Bibliotheca by Pseudo-Apollodorus, in the Fabulae 57 and 151 by Hyginus, in Books 6 and 9 of the Metamorphoses by Ovid, and as a ship name in Book 5 of the Latin epic poem The Aeneid by Virgil between 29 and 19 BCE. As a reflection of the volcanic land of Mount Chimaera in Turkey, and with its and her connection to the god of smithing, the Chimaera could have been named for this fiery connection. It's not particularly surprising then that the Greeks gave her the background and powers that she had. But why did they have to make her a monster? Maybe the most recognized example of Chimaera, though not always seen as one, is the Sphinx. Though, like the Chimaera, there are multiple representations of sphinxes, mostly due to the cross-cultural pollination of the word due to the expanding Greek and Roman empires. According to its entry in the 1848 edition of A Dictionary of Greek Biography and Mythology, the Latin word sphinx came from the ancient Greek sphinx, which seemed to derive from sphingo, meaning to pull tight, to squeeze, or to strangle, or from the Egyptian Shesepunk, meaning divine image, or literally living image. The trouble with the Egyptian translation, however, is that wasn't the Sphinx's name, as that was supposed to be Haramunket's from the New Kingdom, but also the head is thought to have been recarved by Pharaoh Khafre in his own image, who ruled around 26 years in 2500 BCE during the 4th dynasty. But a generic catch-all term like Chimaera, and the Greeks understood what they were translating. The divine image meaning works for all pieces of art, especially when showing the face of a king or god. Also sometimes known as the hierogosphine, the griffin is a mixture of a bird, typically an eagle, falcon, or hawk, and a lion. The etymology of the word is Greek in origin, as the name was coined by Herodotus for the hawk-headed sphinxes that he saw in Egypt. Herois, Horus the Elder, was usually depicted as one, with the head of a falcon and the body of a lion. Specifically, the name Hierogosphine comes from the Greek hierox and sphinx. It has, like many chimera and sphinxes, presented a wide variety of attributes, including a horse body, which is also another creature called a hippogriff, no wings, and long ears like belonging to a horse. And yet another being that came from ancient Egypt was the ram-headed sphinx, which Herodotus called a cryosphinx. These changing forms and the ideas of griffin-like creatures also appear in a variety of other mythical traditions, with views of their contributions being either helpful or harmful. These include the Anzu. From Assyrian mythology, a translated quote in 1853 from Layard is Ninurta with the thunderbolts in pursuit, Anzu who's stealing the tablet of destinies from Ilios sanctuary. The lion bird, alternatively called Zu or Imdugud in Sumerian, is either the son of Sirius or of the pure waters of Apsu, depending on which version. Second is the Ziz from Hebrew mythology, which is an archetypal monster thought to be so big he could block out the sun. In the art he is shown with the behemoth, land, and Leviathan, sea. According to parts of the Bible, after Judgment Day, Ziz is a delicacy to be served to the pious at the end of time, to compensate them for the privations which abstaining from the unclean fowls imposed upon them. Third, a Chinese Pi Xiu, a hybrid creature of either prosperity and wealth or the warding away of evil spirits, depending on which gender they were, which one could tell by the antlers. The former were male, called Tianlu, and the latter, Bi Xie, were female, The females had the head of a Chinese dragon, the body of a lion, and a pair of feathered wings. At the tomb of Emperor Wu of the southern Xi, or Wangxi Wu Di, or going by his personal name, Xiaozi, who ruled from 482 to 493 CE in Danyang near Nanjing. According to the epic Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, by Frodosky between 988 and 1010 CE, the Simush, or in Persian Samu, of Zoroastrian mythology from ancient Persia, present-day Iran, is inherently a benevolent creature. Sufi poetry from around the 12th century CE, and Kurdish folklore, a benevolent creature that purifies and blesses the land with fertility. She has the head of a snarling dog, the paws of a lion, and the tail of a peacock. Like the other chimera, descriptions often vary, showing her with a human head or closer to a full bird. The word manticore, from the early to middle Persian mythical or mythical, meaning man-eater, according to Pausanias in his description of Greece, is an Iranian legendary hybrid creature. It was described by a Greek physician named Thesis in his book Indica, meaning India, in which he wrote about the natural history of the area from his time at the Persian court of King Artaxerxes II in 400 BCE. Aelian, a Roman author who lived around 200 years later, wrote that the manticore was a wild beast, with the head of a man on a body as shaggy and large as a lion, with lion's feet and claws and the tail of a scorpion. Theseus asserts that while they are young, the manticores don't have stingers, so that's when they are hunted. This is so they can be killed and their tail crushed without releasing the evil from their stingers, producing an evil crop. Later writers and philosophers such as Pausanias, Aristotle, Pliny the Elder, and Greek writer Flavius Philostratus kept the ideas going for centuries of stories, describing the being as anything from a regular man-eating tiger to the hybrid beastly creature described. Inspired by the authors of ancient times, medieval authors and scholars continued the tradition of including the manticore in bestiaries, sometimes depicting it as a tiger, sometimes with tusks and monkey-like feet, maybe a huge scorpion tail with added quills, and still sometimes with a woman's head. So with a greatly expanded definition of what could be considered a sphinx, it is tricky to know which of the Hellenized or any of these worldwide original stories came first. In the increasingly connected Mediterranean world, was it the Greek translation of the Egyptian word for the statue of the Sphinx, or the Sphinx in the story of Oedipus Rex, within which the female-headed version blocked the entrance to seven-gated thieves with her famous riddle? In Cairo, the male-headed version, the Androsphinx, was recarved from what scholars think was the head of a lioness to the head of King Khafre around 2550 BCE. Evidence seems to point in multiple directions and is part of an ongoing discussions about the Sphinx and subsequent topics, which are all expansive enough to fill multiple books. In the Egyptian versions, sphinxes are protectors. Killers maybe, but like any mother lioness would guard her young, not unlike the story of the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet, but not the mysterious Geno-Sphinx, female-headed, that killed anyone that couldn't solve her riddle. Even while the whole creature was changing, one big aspect remained generally consistent: that it was a monster. But that wasn't a case in all of the world. Some of the myths coming from Egypt, India, and South and Southeastern Asia were regarding the creatures as, depending on the place, avatars for gods, guardians, and/or wards against evil, even though they were described and painted as, and sometimes even called, beasts. There are a variety of gods that can be considered chimera. Egyptian gods and goddesses are widely known for being depicted with animal heads. Ra is the eagle, Horus is the falcon, Anubis the jackal, Sobek the crocodile, Hathor the cow, etc. These deities filled the pantheon with good and evil. Osiris was good, Set was bad, but that was never contingent upon which animals were represented. The perfect example was the snake, represented by both the goddess Wodjet, protector of the pharaoh, and the god Apophis, who tries to eat Ra every night and is connected to darkness, thunder, earthquakes, and chaos. But Egypt wasn't the only ancient civilization that puts the heads of kings and gods on animal bodies or the other way around. In ancient Assyria, for example, bas-reliefs of shadow bulls with the crowned bearded heads of kings guarded the entrances of temples. India uses the Sanskrit Purushamitra, meaning man-beast, Naravirala, meaning man-cat, or in Tamil, Parushamorugam, Parushmigam, also meaning man-beast, while in Sri Lanka, Narasimha is man-lion, in Sanskrit in Myanmar is Manusiha or Manutiha in Pali. In Thailand and Pali, Norasing also means man-lion. This came from a variation of the Sanskrit Narusimha, or was called the Tep Norasing, meaning man-lion deity, or Norana. The Narusimha, or man-lion, is described as an incarnation of Vishnu within the Puranic text of Hinduism, who takes the form as a half-man, half-Asiatic lion, having a human torso and lower body, but with a lion face and claws. Another is Garuda, which makes appearances all over India, Thailand, and in many places around Southeast Asia. Garuda is a Hindu deity primarily depicted as the mount or Vahana of the god Vishnu. He is often described as the king of the birds and is shown in either a zoomorphic form as a giant bird with partially open wings, or an anthropomorphic form, a man with wings and some other ornithic or bird-like features. The Garuda mythos has spread far following Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jain faiths, and has reached places in India, Bali, Indonesia, Thailand, and more. So many of these are not only in stories of their history from their separate lives from humans, but in the ways that they would continue to impact the world. In the various mythos in which humans are rarely directly involved with the gods and goddesses, are shown as protectors and balancers of nature and the universe at large. When they are depicted in statues in all of their glory, the people may have wanted to recognize the connection that humans have with nature by combining the humans with animals. As an aside, a question I don't have an answer to is, why were stories from ancient Greek and Roman mythology, which link to the Western medieval traditions, far more against the mixtures of creatures' forms while still being benevolent, while civilizations in Egypt, Near East, and many Far East cultures had much less of an issue with Chimaera not being monsters? Could it have to do with the early embankment against the natural world? Or were we shaped by the influence of Christianity, which espouses the belief that humans are above nature, not part of it? The medieval Latin word chimera was from the ancient Greek chimaera, which literally meant she-goat as opposed to male goat, chimeros. This direct connection to the etymology in Greek creature names does bring up the question, which came first, the gender of a mythological creature or the word? While there isn't a definitive way to say for sure, scholars have looked through other etymological links to find hints. At the Museum of Anatolian Civilizations, there is a tablet with an image of the Neo-Hittite chimera from Gilgamesh, dating to around 850 to 750 BCE. It shows a chimera with a human head with a pointed nose pointing to a, quote, Luvian or Hittite ethnic origin, unquote, directly over a lion's head. This was from Herod's Wall, Carchemish, in the late Hittite style under Armenian influence and is now housed at the museum in Ankara, Turkey. This transfer of myths between groups is sometimes believed to be the origin of the Greek version. While we don't have specific dates of when myths were originally told, one of the recorded stories of Bellerophon slaying the chimera is in the Theogony by Hesiod, who lived sometime between 750 and 650 BCE. An older appearance of the chimera is made in Book 16 of the Iliad, which is thought to have been written sometime in the 8th century, so 800 to 700 BCE. all around the same time, and perhaps around the length of a lifetime around the Hittite version was sculpted. Of course, this has no bearing on oral traditions if the creatures were transplanted via spoken stories, like Homer would have done. Tracing the first mention is next to impossible. The mountainous region in ancient Lycia, more specifically Mount Chimaera, is thought to be in the modern area Yanartas in Turkey, where some scholars think that the gas and fires were the origin of the entire Greek Chimera myth when described by Pliny the Elder after he was originally told the story. This same area was named in the speech made by Iobates as the monster's home. Possibly due to the dozens of methane gas vents in the ground, the area also houses a temple of Hephaestus, about 3 kilometers away from Citadel or Sirali, near ancient Olympios, Lycia. Another subsequent link can be found because of the town or region of Himer in southern Albania, which has a substantial Chaonian population, or ancient Greeks, that was originally called Chimaera, or Chimera, which can explain the name Chimaera, even if it sounds a bit different today. Due to the original myth taking place in Lycia, it is likely that the first area could likely be one of the story's originators, while the latter shares similarities and thus was named for the pre-existing myth. Other than from etymological roots, why do chimeras even exist? In the case of the Greek griffin, some scholars think that they were based on the fossilized remains of dinosaurs, much like the idea of the dragon. On griffins, folklorists and historians write that it was specifically from the 7th century BCE that the Greeks may have been influenced in part by beaked dinosaurs such as Protoceratops and Psittacosaurus, which would have been seen on the way to gold deposits that were found by nomadic prospectors of ancient Scythia in Central Asia, and thought to be assumed to be a mixture of bird and a mammal. This hypothesis has been contested by paleontologist Mark P. Whitten, who was referred to in the previous bestiary episode, pointing out that this hypothesis ignores older depictions of griffins from a variety of Eastern and Near Eastern countries before the Greeks ever knew of the existence of these fossils. He also argues that the Greek versions of griffins were based on living creatures because the anatomies between the fossils and the mythical versions don't match up. But as for the mere existence of chimera, an ancient studies master's thesis from Lian at Stellenbosch University concluded that hybrid monsters, as the manifestations of the internal dichotomy of man and thus tenuous relationship between order and chaos, played a critical role in the personal and communal definition of man in ancient Greece, after examining the myths of minotaurs, centaurs, etc. For recent chimera, we have chimera-like beasts in the 19th century, drawings of Cthulhu, Beast from Beauty and the Beast from Disney, and really any drawing putting animals together that anyone can imagine. As has been already shown, D&D, Pathfinder, and so many RPGs in the same vein contain hybrid creatures, chimera, from mythology and add new twists on old versions. With the update of Lovecraftian as a base for world building, there are even more so-called monsters to fight. But no one says a player group has to fight. If role-playing games are about anything, they're about finding creative solutions to different and difficult situations. The beast from La Belle et la Bête was frightening, but incredibly well-mannered even from the beginning, which they altered a bit for the Disney version. But the Beauty and the Beast story is closer to Eros and Psyche, so I won't be diving into that. Although the 1740 French fairy tale and its later versions are examples of something that appears monstrous turning out to be friendly. When implemented in a game, the bonus comes from, other than making a friend out of terrifying creatures that may give you protection and help when needed, it also throws the GM, and that's always fun. After centuries of stories and illustrations, people wanted some proof. This is roughly when people like P.T. Barnum stepped in. An earlier example of a creature that was thought to be a hoax upon description was the platypus. While described by David Collins in 1797 with an illustration sent back to England, it took years, decades, to finally accept the truth. The platypus, however, despite its appearance, is not a genetic chimera because it is not a mix of different species. It just looks like it could have been, especially because the description called it a duck mole. Less than 50 years later, 1840s onwards, P.T. Barnum was billing both these innocent monotremes and true hoaxes like the Fiji mermaid as oddities and curiosities. Of course, we now know that these are hoaxes, at least the Fiji mermaid. The one paraded around by Barnum could have been made as a joke on tourists by Japanese fishermen. This is not the worst thing that Barnum has brought into the world, but what is really horrible is that people can and do still buy these Fiji mermaids online. As with evolution, genetics change, stories are told, new discoveries are made. How we react to new things and experiences can help us see a way into the future. Many creatures, mythical or otherwise, can be beastly, adorable, or even both. The most important thing is to read the behaviors that the smartest heroes seem to do in their mythos. If we take all of these chimeras as real beings, gods, magic, etc., we can see that they tend to act like a person, or at least just a normal everyday creature in the same situation. The myth of Bellerophon is a story of the archetypical hero brought down by his hubris. His first enemy was a chimera, and so could have been the friend he made along the way if this was told from a different cultural perspective, and so was the friend he had to make to succeed in his task. Mythology, folklore, and changing language reflect the atmosphere of culture at the time, and this will certainly evolve over the centuries. The name chimera turned into a vast definition covering gods and mythological creatures, scientific naturalist studies, more advanced genetic works, and even computer language. Chimera can be seen as monsters, friends, protectors, gods, and even chaos incarnate. But what I hope that we all can learn is that we can't judge a book by its cover. The biggest change seems to be that the chimera has gone from being illusionary to being stories to reality. All it took was a change of perspective. I'd like to thank everyone for coming on this detour with me into all the chimera, although I really didn't touch on even a quarter of the chimera in this episode. There are far too many chimerical creatures scattered around the world to cover them all. If you're not already, I would greatly suggest reading through my article and looking at all the beautiful pictures. Look at the post on detoursandarchaeology.com for more worldwide mythical chimera. You can check out the post that goes along with this and click on every single link for all the creatures that I included, as well as for a fuller list of hybrid creatures. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology, all the chimera. Whether you've heard my episodes before or if this one is your first, I truly appreciate your time and interest. I would like to apologize for any names or pronunciations I get wrong. I do make hearty attempts, but of course I make mistakes. I really want to learn, so please, if you have any comments, corrections, any questions, or if you have an idea of something for me to delve into, you can comment directly on whatever podcast app you're listening to. Email me directly at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com or head over to my website at detoursinarchaeology.com and go to the contact page. I'd especially like to thank my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to join them, head over to my channel's page at patreon.com/detoursinarchaeology. You can sign up to be one of my cultural resource technicians, with which you get extra goodies every week, like bloopers, more writing, or photo blogs that are not on my Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram to catch the latest photos at Flying Sepida. Sepida is spelled S-E-P-I-I-D-A. It is the family name for cuttlefish without the E at the end. And don't forget to sign up for email notifications at my website after you read a bunch of different articles. Every Wednesday, I have either an article or one of my personal illustrations posted, which you can get for yourself at the second level on Patreon. Another way, arguably the best way to support the podcast, at least for right now, is to subscribe, rate, and review, as this can help it reach a wider audience and kind of get the word out to the general public, and maybe inspire some new people. All the music used was by Scott Buckley, who you can find at scottbuckley.com.au. For the fun or interesting fact this week, I was thinking about dark matter, because we don't know what it is at all. But for now, we know that it makes up 85% of the universe, holding galaxies together with its gravitational force. So it's kind of like cosmic glue. Scientists are still trying to find out what dark matter is, but physicists think that it might be particles similar to visible matter. Since it's invisible, dark matter doesn't absorb, reflect, or emit light because it doesn't interact with the electromagnetic force, which makes it very difficult to detect, and scientists only infer its existence through the gravitational effects that it has on visible matter. If you know any true fun facts, please share them with me and I'll relay them to everyone who listens, and you'll get your own shout out. I'll see you soon for another detour into archaeology. Thanks again.